Hi everyone, and thanks for continuing on to part 2. We're just going to jump straight ahead into this video and pick up where we left off in the beginning of the Civil Rights era. So slowly but surely, realtors began to sell to African Americans in a few areas in the West End. And if you haven't guessed already or didn't already know, white people freaked out and began what is known as white flight. Their flight was often accelerated by realtors who reinforced fears of declining property values. Sit-ins started in Louisville and all over the South in the early 1960s, and in 1962, the Louisville Board of Aldermen established a biracial human relations commission to try and solve racial housing inequities. From the late 1950s to the early 1960s, urban renewal programs, informally known as Negro removal, displaced thousands of Louisville's black and poor residents. As a result, Louisville's black business district disappeared. These plans failed to recognize that black business owners could not afford to relocate and left displaced residents to find their own new accommodations. This, in effect, funneled African Americans into the city's West End. So now the black business district is gone and white flight has hit an all-time high, creating a new problem on top of all the other ones. Due to the layer cake housing pattern that Jefferson County had, Louisville had never had a ghetto in the sense of cities like Atlanta, Chicago, and Memphis had. But with the creation of hegemonic white blocks, urban renewal, white flight, and the increasing lack of housing options for middle-class African Americans, this led to the creation of a ghetto in Louisville. However, the damage was not fatal to the west side yet. While the west side was majority black, it still had an economically diverse population. African Americans remembered great internal cohesiveness and safety. It wasn't until the late 60s that this economic diversity declined and the black middle class packed their bags and moved to other parts of town. In the spring of 1967, protests for open housing began and Jefferson County was flipped upside down. Demonstrators faced violent opposition and the struggle for equality was broadcast on TV nationally. Finally, in December 1967, Louisville became the first major city south of the Mason-Dixon line to pass an open housing law. State Senator Georgia Davis Powers and Representative May Street Kidd introduced a housing bill on the state level, and the Kentucky Fair Housing Act of 1968 became law. The next month, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1968 and Title VIII, also known as the Fair Housing Act, which prohibited housing discrimination. However, residential segregation did not end. It increased. In May 1968, at 28th and Greenwood, mass chaos ensued after a rally protesting the police mistreatment of a black business owner. Hundreds were arrested, 2 African Americans were killed, and there were millions of dollars in property damage. Instead of rebuilding, most white business owners left, and most of the remaining white residents and churches moved away too. Louisville's changing residential patterns reached a critical mass in the 1970s when the federal government started providing funds to help cities eliminate poverty through community development block grants. Louisville received that grant in 1975, and it wasn't until 2 years later that a review board found that the relocation of people from target rehabilitation areas was discriminatory. By the end of the decade, America had also moved into a more mixed service economy, and factories that had once employed thousands started to lay people off, hurting African Americans disproportionately. This, combined with Ronald Reagan's belief in minimizing government programs, moved America into a much more conservative era. By the final decade of the 20th century, Louisville's housing projects, especially Cotter Lane homes in the Park Duval area, were widely regarded as the locus of the city's crime and much of its drug traffic. The Housing Authority of Louisville tried to make improvements to the housing stock with new federal grants and a new housing program called Hope 6, Housing Opportunities for People Everywhere. This program sought to go beyond just government involvement and include the private sector. It took funds to rehabilitate old public housing and turn them into more mixed-income residents. Park Duval was a well-known complex that was improved from this project. Hope 6 was discontinued in 2012 and was considered controversial because it was good for economic development, but not necessarily a good alternative for affordable housing for poor people. This is because those most in need were often displaced without being able to return to the new improved housing. Now, a dedicated group of local housing advocates has continued the quest for enforcement of equal right laws and for the expansion of housing choices. Taking the lead on this work is Louisville's Metropolitan Housing Coalition, a nonprofit organization established in the late 1980s by an assortment of public and private sector activists in order to coordinate fair housing efforts. However, despite their efforts, Louisville has been ranked as the 43rd most racially segregated metropolitan area out of 102. And a 2010 analysis showed that 45% of Louisville's population lives in extreme segregation. The impact of this continued segregation and this system of oppression and marginalization has hindered African Americans' ability to build wealth and increase homeownership as rapidly as white Americans. In the second decade of the 21st century, West Louisville, where the vast majority of Metro African Americans called home, has remained particularly disadvantaged by the historical forces outlined here. West Louisville neighborhoods have aging infrastructures, the city's oldest housing stock, higher rates of asthma, higher rates of lead exposure, and fewer job opportunities compared to other areas to their east and south. It is important to note that not all West Louisville residents are black, nor are all East residents white. The patterns of racial segregation this story has told have also been applied to other minorities such as single mother head of households, disabled people, immigrants, and other groups. See our Fair Housing Action Plan for a fuller history and for a list of solutions. Despite the historical discrimination against minorities in our community and in our country, we should not let this struggle define our neighborhoods and fellow community members. Instead of stigmatizing our West End, we can learn from our history and put forth our best effort to fix what was done wrong. We are all Louisvillians, and we can and we will move forward. Thank you everyone for watching. Your willingness to learn is a part of our solution to these problems. Please stay updated with us at the Ann Breda Institute for Social Justice Research. Bye!